You're listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens and
Chris White.
And today our guest is
Tom Bristow.
Tom, can you give us a little bit about your background and your role here at Lewis?
Certainly. I've been at Lewis many years. I've been here really since 1993.
I was 8.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
That's kind of painful, isn't it, for me? But anyway, my background is initially in clinical psychology, and then later on in my career of clinical psychology, I became a neuropsychologist. Went for further education in neuropsychology, and became board certified in neuropsychology back in 2008. I currently have the beliefs and the precepts of a neuropsychologist, which is different than a clinical psychologist, because a neuropsychologist is going to take the position that all behavior is brain behavior. And so when we look at circumstances and situations and behavioral problems with individual, we look at it from a neuropsychological perspective rather than a clinical psychotherapeutic perspective. And so you kind of change the direction. It's not that I would deny psychotherapeutic approaches. They have great value. However, it begins really from a neuropsychologist approach. You begin to look at behavior through a different lens.
So like neuronal pathways?
Yes.
Okay.
Correctly. Because all behavior is brain behavior.
Right.
Yeah, and it's part of the machine. I like to think of the human as a machine, a biological machine, and the brain is just a piece of that machine.
Exactly.
So today,
and all of our thoughts are sodium and potassium and neurotransmitters.
Oh my gosh, you're going to give us the microbiology, aren't you?
Well, exactly, and a very low electrical charge.
Yeah.
That makes it all happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So
I can make you think things by electrocuting your brain.
Okay, so the only physics side of this conversation that I can include and add is that when I was an undergraduate at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, had a young junior faculty member who liked to stick his head inside the poles of a large electromagnet and shake his head around to use the magnetic fields to scramble the electrons and the ions in his brain.
And change his dipole moments.
And so he did. He said he would see colors and stuff like that when he did it.
That doesn't sound safe.
Well, yeah, he's a physicist.
Okay.
Anyway, today we want to talk about consciousness. And there's so much that's going on. There's a lot of controversy associated with it. Some people will say they understand what it is. Other people say there's no clue what it is. And also with all of the artificial intelligence that's out there, the computers, is it possible for a computer to be quote unquote conscious or not? And today we're going to talk about that topic with Tom. So Tom, how would you define consciousness?
That's a big ask.
In my studies of consciousness, I really would follow many of the research that's been done by Antonio Damasio. And, in many of his writings, he speaks to the fact that consciousness is an awareness of the external environment and the internal environment. But what really begins to, define that or what is our response to that is the fact that when we wake up in the morning, the light turns on. And Damasio would say that, when you go to bed at night, there is no you. When you go to sleep and you go into your sleep patterns, your personality, you don't exist. There is no you. And you're not aware of anything. But when you wake up in the morning, the light turns on. And his focus is what happens is you begin to feel, and that's not an emotional state that we're talking about. It's the fact that you begin to sense your body and the function of your body.
Yeah.
Whether it's temperature, whether it's mood, and what you attend to, or whether I always use this with students because when we're aware of something, we're attending to it. And so I said to students, you don't pay attention that you feel the pressure on your butt until I tell you to, and then you go, oh yeah, that's right. I feel the pressure on my butt. But that's kind of a state to where the body is processing the whole sensation of feelings in the interaction with the environment. And that is consciousness.
It's true that the human body has an enormous number of receptors that are continually taking in information from the world. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we can differentiate speech from the sound waves that are entering into our ear just boggles my mind in some sense. All of the various processing that the brain has to do, because you have multiple sounds that are all on top of each other. And so there's just an enormous amount. But also the brain has to, in some sense, filter out noise. So your comment I thought was really interesting about how you don't necessarily think about your butt until someone asks you to think about your butt. And then you're like, I feel the pressure.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
And
that's sensory adaptation. And that's why people who have sensory processing disorders have a hard time. They get overwhelmed very easily because they're not able to filter out all that background.
Yeah. And the thing that we have to realize is that our commonality with all mammals, I'll just stay with mammals at this point, is the fact that they do the same thing. So there are degrees of consciousness. What makes us so unique is the fact that we have this cortex. And what makes us so unique is that, one thing I know sitting here is that I'm not you. I'm very much aware that I'm not you, that I'm very much a different individual, and that I connect and I experience you, but I know that I can differentiate myself from you. And, you kind of see that when if your cat goes up and is watching TV and they're going after the bird, they have no sense of the fact that that is just an image, that it doesn't really exist. And so the fact with our consciousness and with our cortex is we have this ability to kind of individuate and realize the separatistness of who we are and the awareness of our environment and the awareness of how we are interacting with our environment. And so, that's a form of consciousness. Now, like I said, when you go to bed at night, obviously the system is still operating, but you have no awareness of it. You may have awareness of some type of consciousness with a dream.
Right.
But, we also realize that when we wake up or when we become aware of the dream, if we do, that was just basically a phantasm of some sort, right? That it wasn't real.
Right.
But it was an experience.
So the whole recognizing yourself as an individual versus differentiating between you and someone else. I know they use tests like primates and other animals to see if they recognize self in the mirror. Mm-hmm. And then they say that is consciousness or they're self-aware because you put a dot on a chimp's forehead, show him the mirror, he tries to wipe his forehead instead of the mirror.
Sure.
So would you say that's like the bar for determining if something has consciousness?
No.
Okay.
Because I think there's a lot of theorists that are going to say a lot of animals have a conscious state, but not to the degree that we or primates do.
Okay.
Because, we share what's our genetic comparability decline?
96%.
Yeah, there's 4% difference between our brain makeup and a primate's. And so that there are degrees of consciousness because we can just, see in the environment because all animals with brains, right, have to respond and interact with the environment. That's what the brain does for us.
So I want to go back to your analogy with the cat that you mentioned earlier. And my cat, when I would put an iPad down on the floor with the bird video on, he would walk up and he would look and he would touch the screen. And then he looked at the screen and then he walked behind the iPad, looked behind the iPad, right, and then just walked away. Mm-hmm. It was like, I don't need to pay attention to this. And so that was some level of engagement and thought process.
Exactly.
And I guess with this notion of we have a cortex, Humans are just more sophisticated animals. We have more capacity for engaging with the input that's coming in from all of our sensors associated with our body.
Exactly. You've nailed it right on the head, Chris. The point is of all the animals, we are the most complex and diverse as far as with our capacities to interact with the environment. With our cortex, we've created all types of social structures and social engagements and social expectations. One of my favorite books is, and I know we're getting a little off topic here, is Franz and The Atheist and the Bonobo, and how he talks about moral systems in other animals. Especially in the bonobo, on how they interact with each other, and that they do have a moral structure to where, his position was, so it's not unique to the human. A moral structure is not unique to the human. It can be found, different types of structures can be found in other primates. Talking about elephants, the fact that the elephants seem to have emotions and have an awareness of a death.
Yeah, don't they always return back
they
and
do.
grieve? Yeah,
and they return, and they also kind of keep watch for a period of time when an elephant dies. And so, these are different degrees or understandings, I should say, of consciousness. That, it's not something that's very exclusive. But it's something that all primates, I shouldn't say all primates, but many mammals share to some degree because they have to interact with the environment.
I would say dogs are aware of death. I would think, I had childhood dogs. They were brothers from the same litter. One of them got hit by a car. Mm-hmm. And the other one, we wanted him to not be confused, so we showed him the body, and he started just like howling and whimpering and doing all of those behaviors. And then after I grew up in rural Michigan, so we buried the dog. And then we showed the other dog the empty car where he had been again to let him see, and he didn't eat for like a week. They definitely know.
Right. Well, I have when my wife goes away to do work and is gone for a few days, my one cat, she will, she changes her whole demeanor. Her mood is much lower. She will go sit by the door for hours in anticipation of her coming back. And when she comes back, there's a typical behavior she does. She kind of walks by my wife, and then she goes on the carpet and she just rolls on the floor. And, she does this all the time. And this is the fact that, animals have dopamine. Mm-hmm. So obviously animals have emotions of some sort and limbic systems.
Right.
Yeah,
and they're impacted by those.
Yeah, we have a similar story. When we were in grad school, we were house sitting for a faculty member that was on sabbatical. So we spent almost a year in their house. My wife and I slept in the guest room, not the master bedroom, and they had 3 cats. And after the couple returned, they reported back to us that one of the cats would sit outside the guest room for weeks in the evening time, just clearly
wanted you to come back.
Clearly, was like, where did you go? And there was an understanding that these other animals who had been there before left. But it's not just land. We're talking about land mammals. I've heard stories of sea mammals also, in some sense, acting altruistic, where there have been stories about humans who have been struggling, almost drowning, and then being supported by
dolphins
or something, and helping them. And so one species of animal helping a different species of animal for no obvious reason.
Yeah, it's really arrogant of us to think that our brains are so special that, we are the only ones that have these kinds of processes. When you think about, all brains do the similar things.
Right.
They support the structure and the functioning of the organism, and obviously there's differences in development, but brains are brains.
Right. Yeah.
Brains, and they have the same neuroanatomical, or I should say, similar neuroanatomical structures.
But what about silicon brains? Where do you stand
I don't
on
know anything about silicon brains.
the
AI?
AI.
the consciousness
That's what
of computer systems, algorithms?
Yeah. Boy, I don't.
It's a tough one.
I read a really interesting article that it was called the Chinese box paradox, where you have a human inside of a box, like a big room, and there are all these drawers, and in the drawers are pieces of paper with characters written on them, but it's in a language that the human in the room doesn't understand.
Okay.
And then there's a slot, and there's a piece of paper that's pushed in through the slot. And then there's a translation that says, if you get a piece of paper that has these characters on it, go to this cabinet, pull out this drawer, take a piece of paper out and stick it back out through the slot. Mm-hmm. And so then what's happening is that they're describing a dialogue with something on the outside of the box, where the person on the outside of the box is passing a message in. And then there's this dispassionate, non-animate translator that's saying, fine, the response is to go to this box and pull out this response and then return it. And so the person who's actually doing it has no clue or understanding or consciousness of the conversation that's taking place, but the person on the outside of the box perceives it as a conversation because they're putting a question in and getting a response.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so obviously the person in the box is the computer.
Yes, and that's the analogy. And so this is commonly used, my understanding is, to explain why computers are not conscious. It's an algorithm. It's not what...
Right.
But, and of course it's controversial because apparently there's a lot of people who disagree with this type of a argument, but it's intriguing to me.
Well, is it Mikhail Kachku? What's his book? I forget. Anyway, he's a physicist, and he was...
Can't trust physicists.
He was saying, and it's almost kind of freaky. He says, they're working on the process of taking everything that's you, meaning any of us individually, our whole cognitive makeup, our whole emotional makeup, and that could be translated to be put into or put onto like a CD disc. And he says, so typically, he said, what we could do is you could take that CD disc of everything that's you could laser it to some other kind of like receptor organism anywhere in the universe. He said,
make your
and
clone.
You would be redone, repurposed. And, because there's a couple crazy things about that, because I thought, well, then basically the physical makeup of us is really not necessary, right? You could inject this into any kind of living organism as long as it can handle the data that's put on a disc.
So when it's freaky.
I know it's freaky. And then because the thing is, you say, well, you mean then all of a sudden I become conscious in a different body at a different place, and that would be possible, and that's what.
But would it be you? I don't know.
Well, but the thing is.
What
he
is you?
said, yes, it would be you because it's everything about you.
Yeah.
We're gonna have to come back.
We just found a cure for cancer. Just get a new body without cancer and transfer the data.
In the book *Sapiens*, Harari basically said, probably in the later half of this century. He says it could be a good possibility that no one's going to die of any type of disease anymore. They'll figure that all out. The only way you're going to die is if you get hit by the bus.
Right, accident.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation, but we're out of time. So the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Lewis University. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. The Lewis University name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. This podcast was produced in the WLRA podcast studios at Lewis University. Visit lewisu.edu for more information about Lewis University. You've been listening to Science Coast with Mallory Havens
and Chris White
and
Tom Bristow.
See ya.
Bye.